While discussions about diversity, equity, and inclusion have become pervasive and even fashionable across the United States in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, there's still sometimes not enough attention paid to the psychological toll that issues such as systemic bias and racism have on Black workers and Black communities. We'll talk with a social personality psychologist regarding his research and focus on issues in the Black community on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Safety at work is more than freedom from physical injury. To be safe, you have to feel safe. Join us each week as we discuss psychologically healthy and safe work in the USA. Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. As an occupational health and safety professional who just happens to be Black, I find myself and have found myself in several gatherings, particularly over the last few years or so, giving my thoughts about diversity, equity, and inclusion and safety and how they connect. Also had opportunity to do some research as a part of my dissertation, and it was focused on the lived experience of Black workers' exposure to psychosocial hazards in the workplace. But I'll be honest, the literature review is a little challenging on that because there are not a lot of members of the African diaspora who've taken up occupational safety and health as an occupation. There are very few studies written about the safety environment for Black people at work, because unfortunately in the United States, for a good number of centuries, Black people were barely considered human, and in some cases not at all. And certainly the safety of Black people has not been an issue for many. That's not to say that things haven't gotten better, but that's the foundation that we rest on in terms of the workplace. And so recently I try to get out and learn as much as I can. I was in this session and I heard this gentleman speak and I go like, I gotta talk to him. I just have to talk to him because I enjoy people who have a depth of understanding of a topic and talk about it in really direct kinds of ways and not kind of sugarcoat, just kind of get to it because it is what it is. And so my guest today, again, who I've not met before, and we've not really had a conversation. So audience, you're going to be hearing, us get to, know something about each other. But I'm just really impressed. So Dr. Yasser Payne is an associate professor at the University of Delaware. And before I get into, all of his long list of accomplishments and that type of thing, what I do for folks when they come on the podcast, Dr. Payne, is I have people introduce themselves because I could say a bunch of stuff, but I start off with this question. And the question to you is, so who is Yasser Payne?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something I'm continuing to think about. And that answer sometimes evolves and changes. But nonetheless, I am happy, Dr. Daniels, to be with you today to share with you my story, but also the journey of our research program that I think, has done some real good work, and particularly in Wilmington, Delaware, and beyond. But really quickly, my name is Yasser Arafat Payne. I'm originally born in Harlem, New York City, youngest of four brothers. I'm now in Newark, live in Newark, Delaware, and I'm a professor at the University of Delaware. But had three older brothers. I had parents. I think all of them really modeled for me how to remain committed to Black people, Black community, Black culture, particularly that part of the Black community. My father was a bodyguard for Malcolm X. My parents and my older brothers did a lot of neighborhood programming. I didn't use that language back then, but a lot of Christmas parties and social gatherings, particularly for people who did not have. And every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every New Year's Eve, every Easter, my family provided, all kinds of stuff to the people. And that really left an indelible impression on me. Is at the center of my work. I now have a PhD in social psychology. I am a full professor of sociology in the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice at the University of Delaware. I am a street ethnographer, so I'm the guy who studies street culture, particularly amongst those folk that we may refer to as gang members or, folk who may commit armed robbery or, who may be involved with gun violence. But that particular population, we do a lot of work with that community. And we do it in a way or through a mechanism or method called Street Participatory Action Research. We created that method. We didn't create PAR, but we created the PAR iteration, that we call Street PAR. It's the way that we do street ethnography. So really quickly, PAR researchers and street PAR researchers, we hire folk that were interested in studying, in my case, street identified Black men and women, boys and girls who may be involved in street culture, employ them to be research activists effectively or essentially on the research project. Research is a multi-billion-dollar process just for poor Black communities alone each year for research institutions and universities. Lots and lots of support flowing for research. So our thing is, let's get them involved. Research is very important. It's the way that we control and dominate narratives and establish epistemology, et cetera. So let's get them involved with reading, writing, learning about theory, method, analysis, publishing in journals and book chapters, and taking them to academic conferences, arming them with this skill set to tell their story they already know. They just need the skill set to really turn it over in the ways that are commodifiable and ways that establish power. Street Part is a socio-political project as well. But nonetheless, we train, cohort in, cohort out. We work on different projects in and out of Wilmington. And/or that's the kind of work that we do. That's Yasser.
Wow. Oh boy. So tell me, when you hear the phrase psychological health and safety, what do you think of when you hear that?
So I guess a few thoughts come to mind. I mean, I think psychological health and safety is good language, but in some respects it's not alarming enough. It's very neutral sounding. There's an element of it that doesn't, and we need to start calling things for what there is. There's, particularly in poor Black communities, a lot of us, I will say there are, because we've been testing it, project in and project out, particularly the street identified populations. We collect thousands of surveys by now, hundreds of interviews by now. But we've learned that our data strongly suggests that we think about their psychology, particularly psychology of the streets, and/or their mental health in at least two different ways. They generally demonstrate high levels of general well-being, right? They don't actually demonstrate low levels, let's say, of esteem, or they don't have a negative self. You cannot find that and we're one of the only research programs that's actually testing that and/or able to get them in large enough number to test the idea of well-being and/or what that means, because there are different forms of well-being. But in general, they demonstrate strong or high levels of particularly, and those guys in gangs, in street culture, running around with guns, those guys, and women, boys and girls, because we do it across age and neighborhood. High levels of well-being, particularly family, social, and community levels of well-being. Also personal levels of esteem. We actually do not find low levels of self-defeating attitudes. We find high levels of self-determination, high levels of esteem, commitment to family, community, right? But it's concurrent. They are also, right, experiencing and participating concurrently in a number of quote unquote troubling behaviors, let's say. You know, and another way of thinking about it, right? So how does the crack cocaine dealer love themselves, their community, and their family? And the answer is they do, and they really do.
Right.
A lot of their well-being is actually tied to the concept of family and/or their activities and experiences in the street. It's all interconnected, interestingly enough. But they do, right? And their problem more so is largely structural violence. I will say before we getting into conversation on that, it's important, even though they have high levels of well-being, more generally, right? They can dip in like skills-based esteem, like academic esteem,
Sure.
or kind of a work-based or skill-based levels of competence or esteem. And I will say a number of them, right, or have experienced, some are still experiencing real trauma, real extreme traumas, you know, and or maybe even struggling with PTSD, just things that they've saw, heard, experienced themselves, can concurrently affect them. But in general, they do love themselves, their families, and their communities. And in fact, low-income populations generally have higher levels across race and ethnicity of well-being, family, community, social, than more middle and upper middle class populations.
I find that very interesting. I really do. But as you said, it actually resonates with me, to be quite honest. It does. So again, as I said, we're just meeting. So I'm the product of one of those families. I mean, my mom was a teenager and I was born. She's 14 when I was born.
Wow.
And I'm the eldest of 7.
Wow.
And matter of fact, we were on public assistance when I graduated high school. And I do have, I lost a brother to gun violence, who had been incarcerated. So, I mean, those are my people. And when you mention the issue regarding esteem and how important family is and that type of thing, that just resonates, because I didn't realize that I was poor until somebody told me I was. I didn't realize that I lacked esteem until I got into, other environments that weren't built for me in the first place. And then I was told I didn't have esteem because I wasn't presenting myself in the way that system expected me to, though the way I did present actually brought value. And it took me years to figure that out, that actually my voice and the way that I do things has as much value. And I'm finding out in some cases even more than the values placed on it by that particular system.
Yes, sir.
And I find often, again, I talk a lot about the workplace. That's the challenge that people have in the workplace. First of all, this whole perception that I, as the owner of the business, own these people, that's a problem for me. And particularly as a Black person, that is some of that, quasi or remnants of the culture that we used to have, the legalized slavery that we used to have. There are people who actually believe that they own employees,
yes, sir,
and that they own these human beings, and then that makes them feel that they can treat these people in any way that they feel and talk to them in any kind of way, and what they bring to the table is not important. So I'm just really vibing with what you're saying about either self-described or identified street culture, because these are human beings that happen to hang out with each other and do some things that some might see objectionable, some might even classify as illegal. But, the reality is a good percentage of what Hitler did was legal, and a good percentage of what Martin Luther King did was illegal at the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Wow.
It's true. Yeah, crime is very cultural. The whole concept, people particularly in the 16 and 17 and even 1800s, but even beyond that, but definitely there was no concept of locking people up for physical assault or homicide back during the 16, 17, 1800s, particularly for long periods of time. The whole concept of a prison, right, locking someone up, no one even supported that idea during that time period. Only by the late 1800s and definitely by the early 1900s, they learned how to monetize a criminal legal system, industry. But for so long, the churches and everybody that's not the way that you handle your problems. interestingly enough. But now that's been turned into an industry that's also racialized. I think also what's really important to note when you're talking about guys and women, boys and girls who are involved in the streets, they are oftentimes the product of what we describe as the structural violence complex, which makes it very different and unique, right? That experience. So we live in a capitalistic economy that requires poverty, right? This is, i.e., critical race theory. Derek Bell founded critical race theory, Black man, and spent the last leg of his life in Harlem, New York City, teaching so many of us about how our economy was organized around race, with Black Americanness at the bottom, those descendants of the slave holding South, right? Those particular Black people were to be the bottom or the foundation of, our economy. And/or it was organized around race and ethnicity, right? With us at the bottom and whiteness at the top and everyone else in between, right? But that the economy and/or the wealth, the value of it is accrued as a function of removing us, right? So when you have 10% of Black Americans who own 75% of Black America's wealth, right? 10% of us own 75%, which means they're 90% on 25, right? And then so now we structure and we situate an economic outgroup, right? And out of that group disproportionately comes, right, who we, particularly academics, may describe as street identified, Black men and women, boys and girls, right, who have been rendered to, the outskirts of society as a way, right, to generate wealth for a ruling elite. All of it is connected and always has. So Michelle Alexander, this is her core argument throughout the new Jim Crow, right, that we essentially or effectively live in a racial caste system, her language, not mine. We just changed what that system looks like, or we brand it differently, we use different language, right? But whether we're talking about slavocracy or the convict lease system or Jim Crow, or we're talking about gentrification or redlining, whether we're talking about mass incarceration, she said, we always figured out good language and we've always drawn upon Black Americans to be the core economic, because the economic system requires it. Our poverty is required, right? Every generation, they find a way to structurally undermine us, right? They take away our institutions, our businesses. They figure out ways to systematically and structurally remove us as a way to acquire wealth, right? Can't have both at the same time either, not within this particular economy, right? So we're the out group, we're out, right? Those of us who are able to make it to college, I often say to those students and or faculty members, right? The Black ones, right? You're not representative of Black America. We're not.
Right.
We have been, so when you place the crime, right? And keep in mind, less than 1% of all Black Americans is responsible for all crime in Black America. Most people don't run around and kill each other, shoot each other. And most people are not involved, even in the poor neighborhoods. Most people are not involved in selling drugs or killing nobody. They don't know even where to buy the big bags of drugs at. Right. They may know somebody that knows somebody. Right. With this 1 to 5% of any given city is responsible for all of its violence. Right. And keep in mind, they're about 17 before our hot year, 2020 and 2021. Things are cooling down now. We had roughly 18,000 homicides per year, right? Somewhere between 8,000 and 9,000 of those or thereabout were Black men. Most people who die of gun violence are actually white men who kill themselves as a function of suicide. That's the vast majority of gun violence. I mean, not to belittle it, but homicide accounts for less than 1% of the total U.S. population. You're more likely to die from fentanyl, car accident, health-related.
Yeah, the number.
That's what it was skyrocketing.
Actually, the National Safety Council actually has a place on their website, and you can find out the chances of death for all kinds of things, and heart attacks and cancer are number one, and just kind of goes down from there. We spend a lot of time talking about other things, but not really those things that are going to cause people to actually die. This conversation, even for folks listening, for my audience, is probably going to be unique. They're going to go like, wow, how does that relate to safety? Because what you just talked about So these are the experiences that Black people bring into the workplace to begin with. And then on top of that, even those of us who are not representative of the rest of our community have to deal with a whole nother level of, of disenfranchisement, of, and often, these systems are smart enough not to take Yasser Payne and pull him in a corner and do a blanket party and beat him down physically, but they do it emotionally. Isolation and the microaggressions and we're going to give you tenure later, or your program's not going to get funded. It's all these little things that had your race been different, at least that's been my experience. Had my race been different, a lot of this would have just happened different for me. And so I think, and again, as I said in my kind of an opening discussion, I find myself having lots of discussions about how this whole thing about, diversity and equity and inclusion and how they affect safety, they are absolutely integrated, because no one is going to stay in a place where they feel marginalized, where they feel put upon, where they don't feel respected, where they don't feel like they bring value. They're not going to and then they're going to find something else to do. The other thing that they do may not bring value to you, but it brings value to them. And some of those folks, I've always believed that, folks who are involved in the what I call the illegal pharmaceutical distribution industry, many of them could be anything. They are smarter than many CEOs.
Yes, sir.
They really are. But what they've not had is the opportunity and the access to the systems that it often has marginalized and pushed them off to the side.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And a lot of our studies, a lot of our publications, right? So again, all of this is connected, but we look at, our core population, street identified Black men and women, boys and girls, survey, we triangulate survey, interview data, mixed methods. But we've put out a number of analysis on their experiences with work and school, and or how their street identity is connected or correlated with work, their experiences with work and school. We've looked at their experiences as a function of being victimized, right? But we ultimately understand, right, their experience within this broader or greater context of structural violence. We also know from the literature there is no better effective intervention to reducing violence or crime more broadly than access to quality opportunity or wealth, particularly in poor Black neighborhoods. Everything else pales in comparison to that intervention. That's why with us, to train with us, right, we train them in methods and research. We have them reading journal articles and send me whoever it is you think you can't work with, neither the shooter, the bad, whatever, whoever you send us the shooters, we'll work with them and send you back the kings and queens that they already were. We're going to train them alongside graduate students, and they're going to learn, right? We're going to culturally tailor it, but they are going to be exposed to the same kind of research experience. And this, right, is an intervention, more specifically a paid intervention. Whether students realize it or not, their structural context, they're being incentivized. It's being supported. They may not realize it in the muck, right? Reading and writing and right, but it's because of their access to wealth and class positioning that they're able to even participate as students. Their basic structural needs are being met, actually. It may not feel like all of that in the moment because they're grinding, right? But we have to also create the equivalent structurally, particularly for anyone else that we want to access and use and draw on this kind of information and data and or opportunity and experience. So that means them too, they have to be paid, right? We have to bring in the necessary set of resources so that they can perform, right? And once all of that is satisfied at a basic level, they do perform, right? So it's an intervention, but it's also an intervention that responds to their structural needs. They are being removed. They are out. That's how we start inside these neighborhoods, right? Also, right, we recognize, we provide case management, access to therapy. I'm a researching psychologist, but I've also worked with psychologists, right, clinical counseling, right, more therapeutic oriented, right, we have a theory called sites of resilience, how a street identity, how all social identities, but a street identity is adaptive, right? All social identities are crafted around access to wealth, whoever you are, professor, whether you are an athlete or whether you're someone in the streets, everyone, right? So attitudes and behavior are organized by this more amorphous thing called a social identity, right? That's how humans begin to organize themselves and then into groups and etc. Right? But right, so it links everything together, race, ethnicity, all of it into this more organized way of being, right? So for a group, Black Americans, a segment of them, right, the whole group, but a segment of them will begin to now evolve into or organize, internalize this thing called street life, right? They are being removed. That is their response to what's going on. It's a response to their structural needs, but it's also a response to their mental health and the trauma that they, right? Because think about what had to have happened to you to be able to sell crack cocaine. Right. What had to have happened to you to be able to carry around and or be prepared to use, if not use, a firearm. Right? Think you have to think about what would have to have happened to you to be able to regularly use crack cocaine or heroin to inject, right? So the average crack cocaine user knows that crack is bad. This is how complex the psychology. They already know that. We can bypass that part of the intervention. Right. They know that just like a person that's overweight knows going to McDonald's is bad, or someone knows smoking cigarettes is bad. They already know that, right? Same thing with the people in the streets. They understand. So what occurred? What are they struggling with psychically, socially, familially, right? Where doing that makes sense.
Wow.
Right. All behavior is adaptive, including using crack cocaine.
Wow.
Right. That is psychology 101. No organism can actively organize itself, right, to supplant or undermine its overall well-being. Even, right. So there's something adaptive about what's going on out there. Right. And we would submit, particularly through our research, that the poverty is that extreme. Where physical injury, where incarceration and or death is worth the risk.
Really? Wow.
For large segments, particularly of the economic outgroup, right? Physical injury, incarceration and or death for a large segment of our group, right? Not the entire group. But for a significant segment of our Black Americans, I'm saying, it's in the slave South, physical injury, incarceration, and or death from their perspective. And that's the only way you can measure or evaluate resilience, esteem, well-being, right? It's because this is a socio-cultural construct. There's no place you can touch called resilience or esteem at all. Right. So the way that they view it is adequate to the way that the outsider or the researcher or the more upper middle class standing person views the concept of well-being at its core. So, right. So what is it about their experience and or those experiences around, right, traumatic experiences, trauma, right, that makes involvement in the streets now adaptive for millions? This isn't a one-off. No place in world history can we find large segments of marginalized people where a smaller segment of that group did not go to the street. Didn't start with Black Americans. Now we talk about the Europeans, the Arabs, the Africans, whatever group you want to think of, historically or now. If you find large segments of them that are marginalized, you will find some group amongst them, right, that are resorting to the streets, or what we define as that. Engagement in legal activity of some sort. Right. So us and the data, right, supports this. The way we would speak to, we need larger, louder cries, particularly amongst more radical, progressive Black leadership and beyond, talking about the racial, ethnic wealth gap, about Black reparations, about resources. There never was a time in Black America's history where our schools worked. Ever, not where, when. You know, I know older Black folk like to talk it. Where have they worked at in large numbers? Never was a time where Black America in large numbers had access to quality economic opportunity, jobs, high salaries. Where? There never was a time in American history, going back to the 1600s, I'm saying, you pick the time period or whatever, but there never was a time, right, where we, as a group, had access to wealth, or as a group, nationally had access to political capital as a group. I'm not talking about one-offs or exceptions or for a small time period or before it all was burnt down. But listen, as a group, standing, sustained, never happened. Most of our experience was 80% of us were enslaved, 80% of us were then impoverished from 1865 to about 1965. Our first Black middle class, which is not the same as white, comes in 1965, 66. First stable Black middle class, right? And all that meant was just no more than really over 1/3 of Black America had access to some form or status of middle class standing, right? Maybe we were college educated. I don't know. Maybe we're working some kind of service job now, in more of a corporate climate, right? But nonetheless, most of us still are struggling.
Right. So so when I hear these,
so the therapy has to come from that perspective,
right?
With these guys.
When I hear these discussions in the media and in other places about, how from an environmental, social governance perspective, we want to make sure that we diversify our board of directors and diversify our leadership and bring in Black workers and that. So what advice do you have for those people? Now, to be quite honest, I do believe that some of these folks are honest in their intent. Really are. I believe that many are trying. I believe that many are just checking the box, but I believe there's some that, how do we change this? What do we do about it? So how do you connect what you just mentioned? How do you put it in a way for those corporate type folks who say, look, we're looking for Black talent and all that? How can they get that? How can they make that happen?
So
or can they make it happen?
I think both end perspective needs to occur to begin to make some level of change. You have an economy that's organized around race, particularly notions of white supremacy, right? And it's predatory at its very base, right? And you need an economic outgroup. That's the problem. So critical race theory, Derek Bell tried to advance this idea late 80s. I mean, it's really around earlier than the 70s, but it's established by the late 80s. These are legal scholars, and now this idea bleeds into the rest of academia. Faces at the Bottom of the Well is his New York, is his national bestseller. Faces at the Bottom, which comes out in 1992. Right, but the field is established by 88, 89, right? And they're trying to get out the idea that embedded within the legal, within the political, within the social structural systems itself, right? Is this concept of inequality organized around race, right? And right, so my point is that level of awareness, right, still needs to get out there. We still need to push that. That's what many in the late 60s and 70s and early 80s were trying to push, particularly in grassroots organization, right? This is Black Power movements. This is more progressive elements of the civil rights movement, right? This is what Huey P. Newton, Dr. Huey P. Newton, right? Bobby Seals, right? H. Rap Brown. This is really what they were trying, Afeni Shakur, this is what they were really talking about. And also the academic giants, right? Folk like Dr. John Henry Clark, were in places like Harlem, along with Derek Bell, right? So one of the things we call for in our new book, Murder Town USA, coming out July 2023, for more street park projects, what we do, right? Because we're educating at the grassroots level, giving folk language to understand their lived experience. In one of the neighborhoods that we're in, Eastside, over 60% of the people, Black folk living there, right, are making less than $15,000 per year, right? You have other neighborhoods within Wilmington, places like Riverside, Eastside, and large numbers of folk in Southbridge neighborhood. You're talking about a level of extreme poverty that many of us are living, right? And because we have Jay-Z on TV, or we have the latest athlete someplace, right? Or we have a handful of us relatively that have gotten college degrees. Only about somewhere between 17 and 20% of Black Americans actually get a college degree. So, but, in any event, and because and Derek Bell writes about this, the racial symbolism, how ultimately easy it is to distract Black folk from their poverty, or all of us too, or the group's level of lack of wealth, how there's, right? So my point is that's the first level, and we need both ends. We do need to get into those boardrooms, so to speak, understand it for its relative worth. While simultaneously, I would argue more aggressively, as we argue in Murder Town USA, the book project, that we also argue for a structural violence campaign inside, on the ground, right, inside neighborhoods, right? And we also argue in that book project, we need to re-adopt what Bell Hooks called for as, the utility of the small group, right? So many of us want to be divas and popular, particularly in the social media age. We've forgotten what real change is about. And real change really comes from a small group doing the unglorious work, the tedious day-to-day, right? Organizing it, right? And who may and oftentimes may not get the credit, right? But it's this dedicated small group of folk, right, who remain day in, day out committed. That's generally the change making or makers. And we need to get back to that kind of humility in our activism, right? And we call for that in the book project as well. So I think it's not until we begin to roll our sleeves up, this ain't about getting popular on social media. This is about saving, Black America at its core. And it begins by educating ourselves on what is happening, having a common language, set of ideas, arguments, frame of reference, framework about the inequality itself. I often say inside the neighborhoods, you are the food that feeds, right? So your pain, your misery, your inequality, your poverty is what's fueling the economy. The guys that's running around with the guns are a byproduct of that structural reality. You want that to stop? Then let's stop this over here. Let's put more attention around it then. Maybe we can't stop it right now. Let's talk about it. Let's write about it. Let's research about it. Let's program around it, because it is illegal and unconstitutional to keep a particular people poor, even if it's in service of greater or broader America. Legally, you can't actually do that, right? So, but if we name it enough, study it enough, evaluate it enough, right? Point it out enough, make it real clear, right? Vis-a-vis, right? Black reparations, right? Now, right, we eventually over time have an advantage that we have accrued, right? So at the end of the day, it's value added, right? And coming to these young boys out here who have no place to stay, sleeping in cars on top of roofs, right? Couch surfing, right? And tell them to pull their pants up and just do the right thing and get focused. That is unethical. I think at its best, I think it's highly deceptive. I think it's a lack of leadership, mentorship by Black men, right? And women, okay, but I'm putting them on the men right now, right? I think it reveals a lack of our awareness of how the structural dots connect, how it's affected that young man who now is couch surfing, right? I think it also enrages young people to look at our kind of structural density in terms of our awareness of it all, and we have no answers for our young people, none, except for get it right, do this, do what I mean, just silliness, right? And as a consequence, right, we've created much more of a gulf between younger and older generation, and we're not going to get their respect. We shouldn't get. I tell them all, don't respect nobody that's not from my generation and older. We have given up on you,
Wow.
and that is the truth.
Wow.
We don't speak for them, right? We don't. No groups. No people, right? Their morality, their centeredness, their focusedness, their core identity is based on what they would sacrifice, all groups, what they would sacrifice for their younger generations. Their ultimate character is determined by that, the group. And we, my generation and older, by and large, particularly those little bit of us who have a little bit of power or influence, right? And all relative too, keep that in mind, right? We're willing to sacrifice them.
Wow. 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 You're you certainly didn't know this, but what you're doing is you're doing a great lead up to actually my next episode. I'll be talking with a couple of millennials and a couple of Gen Zers about their perspective on topics. And these happen to be young, up and coming, Black students who want to become safety professionals at some point. But, with all these conversations we're having about psychological safety and all that, it tends to be from a particular lens, diversity, equity, inclusion. They all are fit through this particular lens. And even within the discussion, when people bring a different voice, people kind of look kind of sideways at, well, hold up, that's not diverse. No, that's exactly what diversity is. It is about diversity is about the differences that people have and respecting, identifying, and valuing those differences. Not, well, they look different. I found that I am often invited to places because I look different, but I get excused from places because when I start thinking and sounding different. I can look different all I want, but as soon as what comes out of my mouth, based on what what's in my heart and what I'm thinking about, when it comes out differently, that's when we start having some problems.
That's right.
So that's when I actually demand, my, the respect that's due to the position I'm in or my humanity. When I, expect people to treat me in a certain way and don't, just kind of put up with being, marginalized. When I would just put up with it, now all of a sudden, even the degrees and the position, none of that stuff seems to matter when the voice, when the words that come out of your mouth are not what I've heard before. But that's actually what diversity is.
Yes, sir. The way that we've co-opted and exploited, and this is a Derek Bell argument, Face at the Bottom of the Well, founded critical race theory. He coins the language racial symbolism. I think in that part of the book or chapter, he's describing or talking about the holiday of Martin Luther King Jr. I'm pretty sure he's writing about that. And he's talking about, he's writing about it from the perspective of its utility. How is it useful, particularly from the powers that be? And then how is it useful, particularly for that marginalized Black American group? And or how is it being weaponized against the marginalized Black American group? And but it's a great lesson learned from that discussion. But more generally, I would say DEI, diversity, inclusion, equity, those kinds of discussions, right? Nice buzzwords, and many more. That kind of symbolism, oftentimes, which is racial, is performative. They want a diversity of looks, of the way of how it looks, right? Vis-a-vis Black, Brown, Native, white, LGBTQ, but not a diversity in ideas.
Yes.
Or perspective, or thought, or approach. That has to be unified. That therein lies a what some nigritude folk would argue. Césaire, particularly Césaire, Ames Césaire, the founder of it. That's a disembodied form of universalism, a Western form of universe. That means everybody's on, there's no, I want my particular, he said, my racial particularities within that unity. Wow, that was that's great, powerful thinking. There is, we are human beings, but there is particularly unique ethnic experiences that have to be recognized. And so in any event though, but within the West, within this kind of corporate management of language or perspective, you see everyone really saying the same thing, just from different racial ethnic standpoints.
Sure. Oh boy. While I could continue this conversation for quite a while, I don't know if folks are going to hang out with us. So to bring this to a bit of a conclusion, if folks wanted to learn more about the work that you're doing at the University of Delaware and in other spaces around this topic, how do they find you? That folks who might be interested in your research. I mean, a little bit about how they would contact you and kind of what's next on your
great
docket.
question. I'm a professor once again, professor of sociology in the Department of Sociology, Criminal Justice, and Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. Definitely can check me out there. We have a book project that's coming out July 2023. We can pre-order a copy now, Rutgers University Press. Name of the book is called Murder Town, USA. Homicide, Structural Violence, and Activism in Wilmington. That's the name of the book. I, along with colleagues Dr. Brooklyn Hitchens, and also Mr. Darrell Chambers, we author that piece, Murder Town, USA. You can learn a lot about us there. You can check out our website, The People's Report. One word, thepeoplesreport.com. We have also trailers to our documentary, The People's Report, that can be ordered as well. Which is a documentary on the Wilmington Street Par research program in Wilmington, Delaware. And got a lot of good attention around People's Report documentary. We also have a 173-page report. It's a very interactive website, peoplesreport.com. You can also check out 2 TED Talks, one by me, Yasser Payne, called Walk With Me, TEDx Wilmington, and another one by Darrell Chambers, TEDx Dover. But both of those really detail and describe what we do and the stories that are connected to them. We got more stuff coming out. We got a national study in 4 cities, Philadelphia, Brooklyn, New York City, Detroit. That's ongoing now. Also, Wilmington, Delaware is a 4th city. Everyone getting paid $25 an hour, 20, 30 hours work per week. Research activism in all of these cities, right, on gun violence. So you can check us out on the web with regard to that. I've teamed up with Center for Court Innovations in New York City to work on that national study. I'll stop there, but we have a bunch of projects and a bunch of us everywhere that's just rocking out.
Wow.
And we encourage you all to think about, and this is the way that we do healing, particularly around trauma. This is the way, this kind of intervention with skills and group-based, case management-based. The team is more than a research. We are a family, right? So we deal with it structurally, but we also deal with it socially and familially, the trauma, and or through this thing called Street Park.
Wow. Well, you've oh boy, you've certainly left me with a lot to think about, I got to tell you. And I would suspect that the folks who are both watching and listening, same thing, just some things to think about, because as I, open this up, but while this conversation for me, I connect everything to safety, everything. But what you described is the environment, and safety is often so there's safety, the things that we do, and then there's safe, which is the adjective that we use to describe how we feel. And that ultimately, that's what safety is about, feeling safe. Safety that doesn't result in people being safe is nothing other than activity. It has to result in me feeling some kind of way. And because I am different from the person who established this system or initiated this thing, you have to ask me about that. I have to tell you, I have to explain to you how it makes me feel. That's really the whole context of this discussion I'm having around this topic, is that I don't think we've asked enough, and have often, when we've asked, not accepted the answers that we receive from people.
Yeah.
That it is their reality, whoever they are. because I have one. You can't tell me my reality. I have one. And so you have a right to have one as well. And I think if we're going to create environments where people do feel safe, everybody's got to I got to be able to bring my bag, my voice, my view, and all this stuff is in it. And otherwise, what I think people should do is just be honest that you want to have a homogeneous group with just you and yours, and then just say that. That'd be okay. Then I can go buy elsewhere. I can do business elsewhere because I want to interact with different kinds of people. If you don't, that's fine. But you should just say that. just kind of come out with it. So again, Dr. Payne, thanks so much for widening our horizons. And again, I think it's particularly important that we're having this conversation that will air during Black History Month. Yes. I think it's just spectacular again. So I look forward to future conversations. Now I'm going to be following. I got to follow what's going on. Yeah. Yes. But again, thanks very much. And to those of you who have, spent this, close to an hour with us, hopefully you've learned something, and please do reach out to Dr. Payne. You can reach out to me as well. I'm certainly active on, my website, ID2 Solutions, id2-solutions.com. And, let's keep this conversation going. As I said, again, in my opening, that in order for for an environment to be safe, it has to be safe for everybody. Sure. And to understand who the everybody is, we have to have conversations with that group. And so we've had a great conversation. Thanks very much. Thanks for you who've listened in today. And that's it for this episode. And we hopefully you'll join us next week on the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. To stay up to date with the best content on workplace mental health in America, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and join the Flourish DX community at www.flourishdx.com.